Welcome to another edition of Legends of Motorsport. With me today, David Oxton. Thanks for being here, David.
Pleasure, Ian.
How did it start for you? Where did you catch the bug?
The word lucky has to be right at the front of this discussion, because I was lucky to be one of the many sons of a family, or a dad especially, in motorsport at the time that, I'm thinking immediately Jim Palmer, Graham Lawrence, Paul Radisich, Craig Baird, Ken Smith. We all had this common theme of a motorsport family behind us. A dad that was really just eat, breathed and slept motorsport. In my case, Dad was always keen, but he'd come to New Zealand in 1952, and he'd really set up his little business called Oxton, or Nautox Motors, Nautox Engineering, whatever it was at the time, and became involved helping Eric Mallard bringing or garaging the Grand Prix cars for, what was the New Zealand Grand Prix. So at that stage, when I went to work, I would see Dad with his Cooper Bristols and his Cooper Climaxes and his Lotuses, and so naturally it was a thing to follow. And over the years, Reg Parnell became really a standard visitor at the garage every year, and so I became a gopher on one of his cars and did a Tasman series, including Australia, when I was about 15. So, it was natural that sometime I would hopefully find a way. So in that mid-teen era of me being a gopher, my dad had bought a SP250 Dart, Daimler Dart, which was a sports car, quite fast. It was a write-off. A lot of Dad's cars were write-offs that he rebuilt. And so he raced that and hill climbed it, and eventually I got involved in the hill climbing. When I say eventually, I was probably 17 or 18.
Why did you start racing in an SP250? It's not exactly, every boy's dream of a racing car, is it?
Well, back then it was, because it was a V8 and it was 4-speed and it was a sporty car. So you felt like, a bit of a Jack the Lad when you were driving around it. They were fast, they were, capable of 156, I think, in the old days of Pookie language, whatever track that was, I can't even think. Maybe the long track, stable track. But yeah, they were a bit of a tank, I suppose. They didn't have power steering, and we had to, Dad put power brakes on it to make it able to be stopped. And there was a half a dozen of us race them, sporty guys like mates that we used to get together and get a dozen beer and a bottle of Bacardi and go out to Chamberlain Road and have a hill climb on a Sunday, and then eventually race at Pukekohe. So that started the circuit stuff. The Daimler was, the word lucky comes in again. This was my drive car. So when I say drive car, Dad, I'll buy the car off you. I'll pay you £5 a week for it. As we all know, that did nothing, but the system of contributing was there. And I paid £5 a week and drove it to my apprenticeship job at Rover, T. Macmillan Rover they were at the time, in Green Lane. But that car was so much off the road, either through modification or damage repair, that he said, I think we better look at getting you a bomb, and we move up to something more like a racing car. So that's when we managed to acquire the ex-Dougie Lawrence, ex-Don McDonnell Lola Mark I sports car.
Was it much of a step up? I mean, for you, did you suddenly go, wow, I'm in the big time now? No, I think I was a good poser in those days. I didn't mind having the fun at the racetrack and all that went with it, and so it was a natural step up to go to the Lola sports car, and that brought in new challenges, like running against Andy Buchanan in the Ferrari and Jim Boyd in the Lycoming and the Stanton brothers in their big Chev Corvette. And that was the first year that Jim Murdoch and I went around the country to the summer series of races. So as I keep saying, lucky. I mean, how many kids of sort of under 19 were able to just go off at Christmas and go away 4 weeks racing? I think that it's, you have to be special. You have to be pretty lucky. Then you went to, a proper racing car, some people would say. You went to the 1.5 Brabham.
Yep.
How much of a step was it?
When you go to the racetrack, the older brigade keep an eye on the new brigade coming through, and I'm sure that still applies, as we well know how Kenny's looked at all the young drivers as they've come through. But in my case, it was Rolly Levis, and Rolly had successfully run 1.5 national formula cars, as they were called. He was the champion, and he was the man to beat. And we were at Pukekohe for a test day, and he came over and he said to Dad, "How about you give David a few laps in my car just to see what he thinks?" So of course no one needed a second invitation, least of all me. And so I jumped into number 10. Rolly was the watcher, and Dad was there like any expectant father, watching every lap. And he said, "He's going pretty good, David, Steve, but I think I'll bring him in. He's going a bit too quick now." And that was the common sense, knowledgeable person who could see that possibly the person that was doing it was outside his skill zone, whatever, and he didn't want it to go bad for either him or me.
The Lola,
Yeah.
even though it was I suppose you'd say a proper race car,
Yeah.
it was still a sports car, and it was still quite old, right? But the Brabham was, you know, you're getting right into modern machinery. Was it a big step?
I didn't remember it as being a challenge. It was neat because it had wider rear wheels. I could see the wheels. And anyone who's been in a Formula Ford or been up through the ranks of single-seaters knows the joy of jumping into a single-seater for the first time and seeing the wheels wiggle when you turn the steering wheel, and see the brake, well, in the case of the old cars, see the rubber brake hoses expand when you braked on them. I used to hate that in George Begg's 5000 car the first time I tested it. And I jumped on the brakes so hard and they went out like balloons. And I thought, my God, can't we get steel hoses? They've got this new Air-Equip stuff, George. Can't we get it? So, but the single-seater thing, they are wonderful in the sense of, and you'll hear all the great drivers refer to the driving of a single-seater as you become one with the car. And what they mean is that when you do anything, you feel it not just in your hands but in your whole body, and so you know when it's doing what it should be doing because you're part of it. I know it sounds a bit emotional and gushy, but it does, and it does. And I used to say to people with Formula Ford, you know when you've achieved it in Formula Ford racing, when you're going through the corner and it's neither understeering or oversteering, sliding or gripping, it's just positioned beautifully that you and the car are going through that corner as fast as you can in one perpetual motion.
A lot of people perhaps wonder why you started young, but you didn't take that move. You didn't go there and, you know, buy a Formula 3 car and sleep in a tent and, you know, do that whole thing.
I didn't have that burning ambition that Howden Ganley did, that Bert Hawthorne did, Jim Murdoch did, to go and give it a crack. I freely admit I was a homeboy. I enjoyed the relationship that I have with my team and my friends in New Zealand, but I didn't have that killer instinct to go the whole way to race to try and break into the big time. 1970,
I've got a little note here that you drove a Lotus 70 Formula 5000 car at Sebring.
Yeah.
And one of the guys somehow involved in it was Andy Granatelli,
yes,
the STP guy.
Yes.
Was he? That must have been an amazing time.
Yeah. Well, it started go back a year when a driver called Mike Goth came from America, and his two mechanics, Joe Cavalieri and Bruce Burness, were the American guys who first trip abroad came to New Zealand, and I was more than happy to jump on board as their gopher. Bruce and Joe had connections with George Folmer, and so they convinced him to give me a drive in one of their cars, one of Lotus cars. I arrived in LA, my first trip, drove across to Miami and down to Florida. So it was a 3-day non-stop journey, pretty much, no motels, and that was a great race. Went good for us, qualified well in a car I hadn't driven before, and finished 4th. But what I was trying to do at that time was to get a hold of this Lotus from Lotus Cars and bring it to New Zealand for the second year of Formula 5000. So then we ran the international, well, got planned to come to the 5000 series, ran a great Levin, again I think a 4th place, But more importantly, I'm not sure whether Chris was behind me or ahead of me. I'd like to think he was behind me, but Chris Amon, I'm talking.
Yep.
Chris was in the March 701, which was an STP-sponsored car,
Right.
entered and run by Vince Granatelli with English Mechanics, and yeah, it was a good team. And Vince had decided that this Lotus must be really much better than the March, because if I was able to be more than competitive against Chris. So Vince made an appointment to come and see us at Dad's workshop, and he said, look, you've got two chances here, David. We've got great connections with Lotus, and you can get out of the Lotus and give it to Chris, or we just take it off you, whichever you like. And I said, well, I have an arrangement with Lotus Cars. He said, I'll fix that. And he picks up Lotus, and of course, Lotus Cars dropped me like a hot potato because Granatelli was a big customer at Indy. My relationship with the Lotus guys deteriorated, not with the Americans. They're very, very good. And Ryan Falconer is an engine builder who I still, to this day, still communicate and visit. I saw him just a month ago in the States. And Ryan used to have a very limited vocabulary on sorting out business. He said, David, I'll loan you the engine and you send it back exactly as it looks there. And if you don't, I'll come down and I'll break every bone in your body. So this goes back to what I said at the beginning about friendships, luckiness, luck, and all that stuff. I mean, you build up connections through your growth in sport, I suppose, or anything in life. And if you do the right thing by people, things grow, and you can benefit from it. What did come out of it was George Begg in Drummond in Deep South, who had been building cars for many, many years and building his skills. Ex-McLaren, he'd been to McLaren's and worked with Bruce. George had an unusual way of doing business, and a good mate of yours and mine, I think, Alan Dick was asked to ask me if I would like to ask George to drive his car. And I thought, well, that's a bit funny, but that was George's way. He wouldn't ever offer, he said he didn't offer someone a drive. If someone wanted to ask him, he'd go away and consider it.
I've been racing for over 30 years, and without the help of the motorsport volunteers, we just couldn't do what we do. So check out the action and fun you can have behind the scenes and get involved.
Are you looking for that special property where you can house your cars in decent shedding, or maybe have that man cave? If you're looking for an apartment here at Hampton Downs or to sell one, give me a call at Ray White Tuakau. My name and number's here on the door of the car.
Takapuna Panel Beaters, family owned and operated for over 50 years, licensed for all insurance work. Marty, Michelle and the team can handle anything from small dings to large repairs and specialise in structural damage. Takapuna Panel Beaters, Hillside Road, Glenfield. Sandbrook Windscreens, New Zealand's leading supplier of boat windscreens, heated classic race and rally car windscreens. Your one-stop shop for all custom-made glass and polyglass windscreens, rear screens and side windows. Sandbrook Windscreens, a clear shot above the rest.
Let's just step back just a little bit. In '72, as you say, you'd won the New Zealand Formula Ford Championship, and the prize was a trip to the Formula Ford Festival in England, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So that was it. David Oxton was finally in Europe racing a car. How was the festival? How did you do? Did you like it? Was it a shock?
Well, let's go back a little bit too. The first year was pretty neat. The second year was even better, with Jim Murdoch running when his Titan he brought home. So I had this brilliant, really original idea. Why don't we just paint the car like Dad's cigarette packet, the Rothmans packet? So we got the painter to paint it white and with blue beadings around it and gold lines along it. It was put on top of its race trailer, and I drove it down to Fort Street, Custom Street, I think it is. So where the Rothmans head office was, right on the corner of Queen Street and Custom Street. Knocked on the door and asked to see Mr. Simic. And he asked me in, and I said, I'd like you to look out the window. And he looked out at the car down there and said, that looks very nice. What's that? It's a Brabham single-seater, and Rothman's colours. And yeah, very nice. What do you want? Well, blah, blah, blah. So the long and short was, well, you know, it's a board decision. We can't make a decision now, but we'll stay in touch. And the following year, we had the first commercial sponsorship of the country of that level. So the Lexington was the first car that we ran, and there was a couple of others in that team. Cambridge was masses of cars, yeah. And another beautiful one-liner of Graham Lawrence's. Graham, you're not with Cambridge, are you? He's, no, Cambridge is like arseholes. Everyone's got one. So.
Okay, I'm going to ask you again, because you obviously didn't have a good time at the Formula Festival.
No, I didn't.
Tell me about the Formula Ford
I had a
Festival.
wonderful. Okay, so then Formula Ford, we won the Formula Ford Championship and had a great send-off night at the Auckland Car Club. So the prize was go to England and get to the World Formula Ford final at Brands Hatch in October something or other. So I've always been relatively organised in my life. I'd like to think I have. Maybe that was the good training I had. And I thought, well, there's no point in just turning up at the British circuit of Brands Hatch and expecting to do well. So we went 2 months before. And I remember being on the grid on the first race I ever went to in England, and I was 33rd in a 33-car grid. And Alan Jones wandered right down to the back of the grid, and he sort of said, "You're a long way back, Kiwi." He wasn't wrong. So we had a lot to learn about racing in the UK, but fortunately picked it up pretty well, and over the time had some pretty good races. So there was something like 40 guys turned up to Brands Hatch. So we managed to get on fastest practice time on the first day of practice at Brands, and then fastest in the second practice, and got pole. So it was looking good. But
that's pretty impressive at the festival.
Yeah, it was. Well, it was kind of one up from the festival. It was the World Formula Ford final. But of course, stage fright must have got me. I managed to crash it on the first lap, and so that's probably why you said it didn't work out. Well, it kind of didn't work out, but it was a wonderful trip, the whole thing.
The next golden era was a very golden era for you, wasn't it? Which was Pacific.
Yeah.
And I remember personally I can remember the first race meeting for Pacific in New Zealand.
Yep.
And it was at Bay Park.
Yep.
The New Year's meeting, or
yep.
that meeting. And there was a guy there that stunned us all, really, and
yeah.
probably stunned you, is Keke Rosberg.
Yeah.
Was that an eye-opener?
Of course it was, because not because of where he was relative to me, but his professionalism, his standard, his Europeanisation. You remember that we hadn't really seen that sort of driver. 5,000 was, I won't say older guys, but they weren't youngsters. When KK, as you said, turned up at Bay Park, well, he was the new kid on town. He was the new way of doing things. He came to Pukekohe and he taught us all on how you drive chicanes. And being Kiwis, and we love our equipment, you know. But when this Rosberg bastard arrived, he taught us that you don't go around chicanes, you go over them. And we're all basically wanting to protest this. This is ridiculous. I mean, look at the guy. He's driving like a lunatic. He'll wreck his car. Well, that's the way we do it in Europe, son. So the Chevron, fortunately, withstood all this stuff, and KK was just magnificent to watch when he was 10 tenths, you know, and he was usually 10 tenths. Everything about KK was 10 tenths, his living, his smoking, his drinking, his women. He was just that sort of guy, and it was just an incredible couple of years.
There were a few parties at Willow Park, well, and I'm sure that KK was in the middle of all of that, wasn't he?
Well, KK's classic one was Christchurch at Travelodge, and his teammate was one of these early to bed, early to rise clowns. And Mika had gone to bed, and KK and a few of us were having drinks or whatever at dinner time. And he said, "Come upstairs, we'll fix Mika." And I said, "Oh." So there was 5 or 6 of us guiltily followed him up like we lieutenants. And so he said, "When we go in the room, just all go to 3 on each side, 3 on the other, and collapse the mattress around him." Okay, so we got that worked out. So we go in, and he's asleep.
3 on each side, collapsed the mattress around him. We carried it through the door, down the stairs, into the foyer, across the lounge, and out through the restaurant and into the swimming pool. And he was stark naked. So, yeah, but they were the sort of things that you did. They were pretty harmless fun, really. I mean, I just can't imagine that sort of stuff going on today. I'm sure it doesn't. Well, I don't think so.
You've done for your son, or your sons, what your father did for you, didn't you? Was that fun? Did you understand what your father had done for you then?
Anyone that's been involved with, and I started the story talking about luck, and I say, and how I got in. In all the racing, and it doesn't matter what sport, what avenue of the sport, it's very important that you have stickability. If you, in today, like we say millennials are very much in and out sort of people, that won't work in racing or any sport. You've got to have full commitment. So in our thing with the boys, I just loved it almost, I don't know how I can say better than when I was doing it, but anyone who's been a dad of a guy, of a child, not remembering that it's boys and girls today, will understand and remember and see what I'm getting at. The thrill of doing it with your own is almost better than doing it yourself. A father of a son who's demanding can be a pain in the neck. And most teams, big teams, will tell you, you're all right, but keep your father out of it, because they get to a certain point by doing things a certain way, but they can't walk into an established team and expect to have that control. And we've seen Lewis Hamilton and his dad break up and now thankfully come back together. We've seen, I remember Gary Rogers saying, famously said to Scott McLaughlin, now Scott, I love to hear that you've come from Ross Stone Racing. When you were at Stone Brothers, did you take Mum and Dad into work? No, and you don't here either. Karting is the best sport ever. I had only 6 years in it, but what a way to get into motorsport. And if you a father and son sport, wonderful.
David, thank you very much for your time. You've been a wonderful guest here on Legends, so thank you very much.
Thank you again.
I've been racing for over 30 years, and without the help of the motorsport volunteers, we just couldn't do what we do. So check out the action and fun you can have behind the scenes and get involved.
Are you looking for that special property where you can house your cars and decent shedding, or maybe have that man cave? If you're looking for an apartment here at Hampton Downs or to sell one, give me a call at Ray White Tuakau. My name and number's here on the door of the car.
Takapuna Panel Beaters, family owned and operated for over 50 years, licensed for all insurance work. Marty, Michelle and the team can handle anything from small dings to large repairs and specialise in structural damage. Takapuna Panel Beaters, Hillside Road, Glenfield. Sandbrook Windscreens, New Zealand's leading supplier of boat windscreens, heated classic race and rally car windscreens. Your one-stop shop for all custom-made glass and polyglass windscreens, rear screens and side windows. Sandbrook Windscreens, a clear shot above the rest.
October 1965, New Zealand saloon car racing changed forever. Why? Because of this car. This is Ivan Sedgton's Fleetwood Motors Mustang, and this is New Zealand's very first racing Mustang. This car started life as a 1965 K-Code GT Mustang. A K-Code was the fastest Mustang that you could buy directly off the showroom floor that wasn't a Shelby GT350. This car was to be built to FIA Group 2 regulations, which were in use at the time in Great Britain, Europe, Australia, and would be introduced into New Zealand for the 1965-66 season. So how do you convert a Mustang road car into a full-blown Group 2 race car? Well, you pay a visit to Shelby American in California, buy yourself a stack of race car parts, ship them home to New Zealand, a few late nights in the workshop, and a legend is born. Ivan raced the car for 2 seasons, and it did actually show quite a lot of promise. He finished 3rd outright in the Group 2 points championship, and he won his class. But there were problems. Handling issues, braking issues, mechanical issues, and these continued into the 2nd season. And after a couple of big engine failures, Ivan had had enough. He decided to sell the car, complete with broken engine, and he walked away. Enter Red Dawson. Dawson bought the car in 1967. He built a new engine for it and went racing the following season. He won a non-championship race at Levels Raceway, the first ever event at Levels Raceway, but in the 8-round championship, he scored points in just 1 race. Mechanical failures continued with the car, and in 1968 he'd had enough. He decided to convert the car into a road car, and he sold it. For the next 20 years it lived an anonymous life as a road car, and it wasn't until Glenn Larson bought it in 1986 that he restored it cosmetically back to the Fleetwood Motors colour scheme. But Glenn kept the car as a road car, and it wasn't until 2004 and its next owner Neil Tolich that it returned to the racetrack once more. Neil raced the car extensively in historic events both in New Zealand, Great Britain and Europe. In 2018 he sold it to its current owner Sean McCorn. The Fleetwood Motors Mustang, a legend, New Zealand's very first racing Mustang, and it's still competing to this day in historic events up and down the country.
Hello everybody, I'm John Tomlin and welcome to the Historic News Spot, brought to you by Sandbrooks Windscreens for classic cars with heated and plastic windscreens for race and rally cars. Today we're going to talk about the SAS Auto Parts and MSC Formula 5000 series. These fearsomely fast small block V8 single-seaters from the 60s and 70s have already completed round 1 at the Sound MG Classic at Circuit Chris Amon Manfield in November. There are 4 more rounds to the series, being 18th and 19th of January, historic Grand Prix at Bruce McLaren Motorsport Park. 1st and 2nd of February, Scope Classic Mike Pirro Motorsport Park Ruapuna. 15th and 16th of February, Southern Car Club's George Begg Memorial Meeting in Tauratonga, with a final round the 21st and 22nd of March, HRC Legends of Speed Hampton Downs. New Zealand has led the world for many years with the revival of Formula 5000 racing. To talk about the coming season, SAS Auto Parts MSC Formula 5000 season, joining me today is current Formula 5000 Association President Glenn Richards. Welcome to the show, Glenn.
Hey, good to be here, John. Cheers.
Nice to have you. So, Glenn, you guys have got a good season coming up with some cars coming out of Australia and UK.
The first one that we do after Christmas will be at Taupo, and that's a meeting that's just getting stronger and stronger every year. It's a fantastic place to go.
5-time champion Kenny Smith aside, you know, the series is really about the cars, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So now you compete yourself.
Yep.
You've got tell us a little bit about what you've got.
I run a Lola T400 there, which is the last of the Lolas that was made for Formula 5000. It came after the 332, which is a really successful chassis, and they mucked around with it with the 400, and they didn't really get it right at the beginning.
That was that rising rate suspension, wasn't it?
Yeah, so they tried to get the suspension inboard, but nobody knew how to tune it. So my car was an example of one that was changed quite quickly.
Formula 5000 is broken into 2 classes, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So we have the older cars in one class, which we call Category A. I think it's pre-69, pre-70, and that's the older cars in there. And then the B category is the more modern cars, which have got a pace advantage. So that's generally McRae's and Lolas.
It's going to be a really good season, the remainder of the season, and I can tell you're really excited about going to Tauratonga. And that's all we have time for this week. I'm John Tomlin with the Sandbrooks Windscreens News Spot. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to you joining us next time.